The New York Times has fired its top editor, Jill Abramson. She's out. And some say it's because she thought she wasn't paid the same wage as men in her position.
Some reports have suggested bosses and underlings found her too pushy, which, as we all know, can be a loaded term.
What the Times has done is undermined their own reporters, undermined women in the organization, and handled this phenomenally badly.
Backroom dealing at the New York Times exploding onto the front pages this week after the editor, the first female editor in its history, Jill Abramson, fired by the publisher, Arthur Sulzberger. Some reports that she was not paid as much as her predecessor, Bill Keller, but this has drawn a pretty sharp response from the publisher. He said, "I decided that Jill could no longer remain as executive editor for reasons having nothing to do with pay or gender. Ultimately, I concluded that she had lost the support of her masthead colleagues and could not win it back." Jennifer Granholm, Mr. Sulzberger having a pretty tough time convincing a lot of women, particularly women in the media, that that's true.
Well, they've handled this totally poorly. And now he comes out today with a whole nother series of stories about who, from people who are supportive to him, sort of leaked through. My guess is she's going to come back perhaps with some other stories. Maybe there is a lawsuit in this. But the reality is that for every female journalist, she knows very well that across the board, women journalists make less than men. 83% of the male salary is what the female journalists look, according to an Indiana study. So to me, this is just an example of something. The reason why this has been so hot is because it touches a nerve that is so real for women.
Yeah.
One of the things you see is a lot of women say that when a woman displays the same kind of temperament issues that men display, being brusque or rough a little bit around the edges, they get punished. But Arthur Sulzberger's response was, no, what this shows is that when women get top management positions, they are fired sometimes just as men are.
Well, that's reasonable enough, and yet somehow the attention and criticism, I think, was focused on the woman in this story, Jill, and not on, say, the fellow who runs the paper, who's had a heck of a lot of executive editors in the past decade, who has hired them, who has fired them. So perhaps there's some temperament going on there. You know, we don't know the exact facts. It seems to me all the exact facts about money, but has there been a little pushing around of a woman here? I suspect so.
Yeah, well, here's what's real. It's not just journalism. Women, on average, are paid less in every sector. And when women are assertive and commanding in leadership, people call them names like pushy. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has been remarkably successful as a speaker. John Boehner hasn't passed anywhere close, and yet, people don't draw the comparison, and she still gets roughed up by the right a lot. And I guess, you just see it too much to isolate this from so many other things where women just are not, even in the low-wage workers, minimum wage workers, women would benefit more if we raised the minimum wage, because whether it's at the top of the scale or the bottom, it's just not fair.
But even
I love the idea that the liberal elite is now very worried about the persecution of Jill Abramson, who made only $750,000 a year in her last year at the New York Times.
I mentioned the minimum wage.
No, well, let's mention. I'm happy to have an economic policy.
This is a first world problem.
But I think you guys should be much more upset about Arthur Sulzberger. Why is he's the one who's lost the confidence? If you could have a private discussion with his masthead colleagues at the New York Times, I don't think they have a very high opinion of him. Why does he run the New York Times? Because he inherited it. Shouldn't you guys be more upset about? Shouldn't you guys be more upset about the top 1%?
If they can treat Jill Abramson this way, what about the other women? What about the younger journalists? What about, it's a real problem, and it's sort of a symbol.
Who's the they? Who's the they who's treating her that way?
Well,
Arthur Sulzberger, Mr. Liberal, Mr. Democrat, Mr. Political Correctness.
Though, Bill, it's not a limited thing. It's a societal problem we must confront.
Not one of the top 10 newspapers in the country run by women now.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's the same. You see, this is a systemic issue. Look at the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies. There are only 5 women who are governors in this country. I mean, it's just a systemic problem.
Yes.
But the issue about her pay, I mean, he can say she was let go for other reasons, but he can't explain the pay issue. I mean, from the numbers that were released, granted, it's a big salary, no question about it, but it's a systemic issue from the top to the bottom. She was earning $475,000, and her predecessor was earning $559,000. She was earning $100,000 less when she was the bureau chief of the Washington, D.C. office than her predecessor. What is going going on that systemically, even very high earners are earning significantly less.
And it creates a real bind, Peggy Noonan, because if one report is true, she hired a lawyer to make inquiries about that, and that created problems.
Yes. Look, do you know what I think we're actually talking about? There's a form of power in the world that is, wow, I'm very important right now. I have this fabulous job. I hire and fire people. I am important. I am powerful. And then you realize, no, you can be removed tomorrow. The person who owns the institution is the powerful person. And that is part of the inherent unfairness and yet immovable factuality of life.
Goes back to Bill's point.
George, can I
go ahead quickly.
You know, we live in a two-income world nowadays. When women are underpaid because of their gender, it hurts the whole family. Men need to get on top of this issue too. It's a real problem for all of us.